The saddest part of betrayal isn't the lie. It's realizing the person you protected the most was quietly teaching themselves how to live without you. I never thought those words would describe my marriage, but the night my wife finally asked me why I didn't want her anymore, they were the only thing echoing in my head. The house was unusually quiet when I walked through the front door. Not peaceful, empty. The kind of silence that settles into walls after too many arguments have gone unfinished. Vanessa was standing by the kitchen island, still wearing the cream-colored dress she'd left in that morning. She looked beautiful in the effortless way that had first caught my attention 12 years ago. Her hair framed her face perfectly, and the warm pendant lights above her painted her skin with a soft glow that once made me believe I was the luckiest man alive. For a split second, I almost remembered what it felt like to miss her. Almost. She looked up as I placed my keys in the ceramic bowl by the entrance. "Marcus." I nodded politely. No kiss. No hug. Just two strangers who happened to know exactly how the other liked their coffee. "I've been waiting for you," I figured. She hesitated before walking closer. There was something unfamiliar in her expression. Not anger. Not pride. Fear. It was strange seeing fear in the eyes of someone who had always assumed I'd never leave. "You've changed," she whispered. I loosened my tie without answering. She searched my face as though looking for the man who used to smile every time she entered the room. He wasn't there anymore. "Marcus," her voice cracked. "Why don't you want me anymore?" The question lingered between us. Months ago, I would have rushed to reassure her. I would have apologized even if I wasn't the one who'd broken us. I would have fought for another conversation, another chance, another tomorrow, but not tonight. I looked directly into her eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't see my future. I saw a lesson, a painful one. A lesson that had cost me almost everything I believed about love. A cold smile found its way across my face before I answered. "Because you gave away what was mine." The color drained from hers. She blinked once. Then again. I don't know what you mean." Of course she didn't. Or maybe she did, and simply hoped I never would. People often think betrayal begins with a kiss. They're wrong. It begins much earlier. It begins the first time someone stops protecting your heart. The first time your feelings become inconvenient. The first time your loyalty is mistaken for weakness. By the time another person enters the picture, the betrayal has already been happening for months. Sometimes years. Vanessa opened her mouth as if searching for the right explanation. Instead, only silence escaped. She wasn't prepared for this version of me. The Marcus she knew would have raised his voice, demanded answers, argued until sunrise. This man standing before her had already mourned the marriage long before she realized it was dying. That frightened her more than anger ever could. "I think you're overreacting," she finally said, forcing a nervous laugh. "You've been distant lately. You're always working. Maybe we're both just tired." I almost admired how naturally the excuses came. Once, I would have accepted them. I would have blamed stress, money, long hours, anything except the truth. But truth has a peculiar way of surviving every excuse. It waits patiently until you're finally strong enough to look it in the eye. I picked up the folder resting beside my briefcase. She noticed it immediately. "What's that?" Something I should have prepared a long time ago. Her eyes followed the folder, then returned to my face. For the first time since we'd been married, uncertainty replaced certainty. She had spent years believing I would always be the man chasing after her. She never imagined I'd become the man quietly walking away. What she didn't understand was that I hadn't stopped loving her overnight. That kind of love doesn't disappear with one argument or one mistake. It dies one disappointment at a time. One broken promise. One unexplained absence. One casual lie. One forgotten anniversary. One cold shoulder. Until one day, the heart simply refuses to bleed anymore. And by the time she asked why I didn't want her, the answer had already been written. Long before she found the courage to ask the question. People always assume a marriage falls apart because of one unforgettable moment. In my experience, it dies in 1,000 forgettable ones. When I first met Vanessa, she made ordinary days feel like celebrations. We met at a neighborhood charity event in Atlanta. I was volunteering because my mother had raised me to believe that the measure of a man wasn't how much money he made, but how many people felt safer because he was in their lives. Vanessa was there representing the marketing firm she'd just joined. She laughed easily, talked with confidence, and somehow managed to make every person in the room feel as though they mattered. When she smiled at me for the first time, I honestly believe God had answered a prayer I hadn't even known I was praying. She wasn't impressed by flashy cars or expensive watches. At least, that's what I believed. She admired discipline, integrity, kindness. Or maybe she simply admired the version of me that made her life easier. Back then, I couldn't tell the difference. Our first years together felt almost unreal. We rented a tiny apartment where the air conditioner barely survived every summer, and the kitchen was so small that one of us had to step aside just to let the other open the refrigerator. Somehow, those were the happiest years of my life. We cooked together, laughed over burnt pancakes, watched old movies curled up beneath the same blanket, dreamed about the house we'd eventually buy, the children we'd someday raise, the vacations we'd finally afford. Neither of us had much money, but we shared something that felt more valuable than wealth. We shared certainty. I never doubted that she was on my side, and she never had to wonder whether I'd protect her. When I proposed, I didn't promise perfection. I promised consistency. I'll choose you, I told her, even on the days when love feels difficult. She cried before saying yes. Looking back now, I often wonder whether those tears came from happiness or guilt for promises neither of us truly understood. Marriage changed our lives quickly. My career in commercial construction took off faster than I'd expected. Promotions came one after another, followed by larger projects, longer hours, and responsibilities that kept me away from home more often than I wanted. I didn't mind. Every extra hour I worked had a purpose. The house with the white columns Vanessa loved. The luxury SUV she pointed at every time we drove through Buckhead. The vacations she'd save on Pinterest. The future. Everything I built had her name written somewhere inside it. Meanwhile, Vanessa's career blossomed too. She became a senior marketing executive before turning 35. She was brilliant, creative, ambitious. Watching her succeed filled me with pride. Whenever people congratulated me for having such an accomplished wife, I'd smile and answer the same way. She earned every bit of it. I meant it. Success looked good on her, until it slowly began changing what success meant. The late meetings became normal, then the networking dinners, then the weekend conferences. Her phone buzzed more often than we actually talked. Conversations that once lasted hours became quick exchanges while she scrolled through emails. Our dinner table slowly turned into two people eating at different times. When I asked how her day had been, she'd answer without looking up. Busy. When I tried telling her about mine, she'd nod while replying to messages. I convinced myself this was adulthood. Real marriages went through seasons. Everyone said so. Friends joked that romance naturally faded after enough years together. Marriage wasn't supposed to feel like dating forever. So I ignored the quiet ache growing inside me. Not because I didn't notice it. Because I loved her enough to believe every explanation she offered. Work has been crazy. This project is almost over. Next month will be better. I repeated those promises to myself more often than she repeated them to me. The strange thing about love is that it makes intelligent people defend impossible situations. Every missed dinner had a reasonable excuse. Every canceled weekend had a professional obligation. Every forgotten anniversary became an accident. Every disappointed look on my face became my own fault for expecting too much. Without realizing it, I stopped asking for her time. Stopped asking for conversations. Stopped asking to matter. I thought I was being supportive. I didn't realize I was quietly teaching my wife that my needs could always wait. And once someone learns you'll always wait, they eventually stop rushing back altogether. The first thing people stop hiding isn't an affair. It's indifference. Looking back, I can't point to a single day when Vanessa became someone I no longer recognized. It happened the way seasons change. So gradually that you don't notice until one morning the air feels different. At first, the little things almost seemed too insignificant to question. She started taking her phone everywhere, not just to answer calls, to the bathroom, to the laundry room, even to take out the trash. The same woman who used to leave her phone lying on the kitchen counter now kept it face down as though it contained state secrets. I laughed at myself the first time I noticed. Don't be ridiculous, Marcus, I thought. People change habits. Then she changed the password. Again, I found an excuse for her. Cybersecurity, company policy, identity theft. Love has an endless supply of explanations when your heart isn't ready for the truth. Soon after, she stopped asking about my day. Not because she was angry, because she genuinely didn't seem interested. I'd tell her about landing a major commercial contract worth millions for the company, and she'd respond with a distracted smile while typing on her laptop. "That's nice, babe." That was it. No questions. No celebration. Just enough attention to keep the conversation alive before returning to whatever mattered more. The irony was painful. I knew more about the lives of my employees than my own wife seemed to know about mine. One Friday evening, I came home carrying a small gift bag. Inside was a necklace I'd ordered weeks earlier. Nothing extravagant, just something I'd seen that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with. Vanessa walked through the front door nearly an hour later than she'd promised. "I'm exhausted," she sighed before even looking at me. I smiled anyway. "I got you something." She glanced inside the bag. Oh, just. Oh, no excitement. No surprise. No hug around my neck. She thanked me with the same tone people use when someone hands them a restaurant receipt. Then she set the necklace on the counter without opening the box. It stayed there for almost 2 weeks. Unopened. Every time I passed it, I felt something inside me quietly crack. Not because of the gift, because of what it represented. Once upon a time, I had been someone she couldn't wait to come home to. Now I had become another item on her daily checklist. One evening, while we were having dinner, her phone vibrated. She smiled. Not at me. At the screen. It wasn't a dramatic smile. It was natural. Effortless. The kind of smile she used to give me when I sent her stupid jokes during work. She quickly locked the screen when she noticed me looking. "Who was that?" I asked casually. "A coworker." "What about work?" The conversation ended there. Not because I believed her, because I realized she'd answered without actually telling me anything. That pattern repeated itself over and over. Simple questions. Carefully empty answers. Enough words to avoid suspicion. Never enough to invite trust. Then came the cancellations. Saturday breakfast became a networking brunch. Sunday movie nights turned into client dinners. Date nights disappeared so quietly that neither of us officially canceled them. We simply stopped mentioning them. I kept trying. I made reservations, bought concert tickets, suggested weekend trips. Every invitation met another obligation, another deadline, another promise that next month would be different. Eventually, I stopped asking. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. There's a point where rejection becomes routine. You begin protecting yourself from hearing no before the question ever leaves your mouth. The hardest part wasn't feeling unloved. It was feeling replaceable, like my presence or absence made no measurable difference in her life anymore. One night, I woke up around 2 in the morning. Vanessa wasn't beside me. I found her downstairs in the living room. The lights were off except for the glow of her phone illuminating her face. She smiled softly as her fingers moved across the screen. She didn't hear me standing there. For a brief moment, I watched the woman who once whispered goodnight to me every evening. She looked happy, more alive than she'd seemed with me in months. Then she noticed me. The smile disappeared instantly. She locked the screen before placing the phone against her chest. "I couldn't sleep," she said too quickly. "So you came down here?" "Yeah." "Talking to someone?" She hesitated. "Just answering emails." At 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning. It wasn't the lie that hurt me most. It was how effortlessly she delivered it. As if she'd already practiced. As if protecting someone else's privacy had become more important than protecting my peace. That was the night I stopped searching for proof that my marriage was in trouble. I already had it. Not in hidden messages. Not in mysterious phone calls. But in the simple realization that the woman I loved had started giving her best attention, her brightest smiles, and her safest honesty to a world that no longer included me. I didn't know who was on the other side of that phone. But for the first time, I understood something far more terrifying. I was no longer the first person my wife wanted to share herself with. The truth rarely arrives like a lightning strike. Most of the time, it walks in quietly, carrying pieces you've been too afraid to put together. For months, I had convinced myself that I was imagining things. Stress, long hours, distance. Every explanation felt easier than accepting the possibility that my wife had slowly stopped choosing me. Then one ordinary Thursday afternoon, everything changed. I had just wrapped up a meeting downtown when one of my project managers canceled our next appointment. For the first time in weeks, I was heading home before sunset. I remember feeling strangely excited. I even stopped at Vanessa's favorite bakery and bought the lemon pound cake she loved. It had become a tradition years earlier. Whenever one of us had a difficult week, we'd surprise the other with that same cake. It was our quiet way of saying, we're still on the same team. I smiled as I carried the box to the front door. The house was empty. At least, it looked that way. Vanessa had texted earlier saying she would be working late with clients. I placed the cake on the kitchen counter before walking upstairs to change. That's when I heard it. Her laptop. It was sitting on the desk in our bedroom. Open. The screen had gone dark, but notification after notification continued lighting it up. Normally, I would have walked away. Privacy mattered. Trust mattered. But trust had already been bleeding to death for months. The screen lit again. A preview message appeared before fading. Last night was exactly what I needed. I froze. Maybe it wasn't for her. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe another notification appeared. I can't stop thinking about your smile. My hands suddenly felt numb. I wasn't searching for evidence anymore. Evidence had found me. I slowly touched the trackpad. The laptop wasn't locked. My heartbeat became louder than the silence surrounding me. There wasn't a folder labeled affair. There wasn't a dramatic confession. Instead, there were hundreds of ordinary conversations. Inside jokes I had never heard. Morning messages sent before I woke up. Photos of lunches. Coffee cups. Office elevators. Conversations about dreams. Frustrations. Plans. Private moments. Then I noticed something that hurt far more than flirtation. She talked to him the way she used to talk to me. She celebrated every small victory he shared. She encouraged him before presentations. She remembered details about his family. She comforted him after difficult days. Those weren't just messages. Those were pieces of my marriage. I kept scrolling. The words became impossible to ignore. You always understand me. I can be myself with you. I don't have to explain anything. Reading those sentences felt like looking at old photographs. Because years earlier, she had written those exact words to me. I wasn't reading the beginning of another relationship. I was reading the ending of mine. Then I saw his name. Adrian Brooks. Regional sales director. Someone she'd mentioned casually a few times over dinner. Just a coworker. Nothing more. The phrase echoed bitterly in my mind. I opened another conversation. This one contained voice messages. I didn't play them. I didn't need to. The timestamps alone told the story. Midnight. 1 in the morning. 6:30 before sunrise. Hours she had claimed to be sleeping. Hours she'd said she was too exhausted to talk. Somehow, she had always found energy for him. I closed the laptop. Not because I'd seen enough. Because I finally understood something that had haunted me for months. The greatest betrayal wasn't hidden inside those messages. It had already happened long before the first one was sent. She had given another man the safest parts of herself. Her attention, her admiration, her emotional honesty. The place in her life that once belonged to her husband had quietly been reassigned. Standing there in our bedroom, I looked around at everything we'd built together. Wedding photos, vacation souvenirs, the quilt my mother had sewn for us, the home we'd spent years creating. None of it felt familiar anymore. People often ask whether infidelity begins with physical intimacy. They're asking the wrong question. By the time two people cross that line, someone has usually crossed a much more dangerous one. The line where loyalty becomes optional. The line where another person's feelings matter more than your spouse's peace. The line where secrets begin replacing conversations. I picked up the bakery box from the kitchen. The lemon pound cake suddenly felt absurd. A gift meant for a marriage that no longer existed. I carried it to the trash can. For a long moment, I simply stared at it in my hands. Then I let it go. The box landed with a dull thud. It wasn't just dessert I was throwing away. It was the last excuse I had left to believe we were still living inside the same love story. From that moment on, I stopped wondering whether I was losing my wife. I finally accepted the truth. She had already given away the part of herself that had once belonged to us. The only thing left for me to decide was whether I would keep giving my heart to someone who had already handed hers somewhere else. The most powerful revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's becoming someone they can no longer reach. I didn't confront Vanessa. I didn't mention Adrian. I didn't ask for explanations. The man she expected would demand answers had already disappeared the moment I closed her laptop. Instead, I began doing something she never noticed while it was happening. I started reclaiming pieces of myself. The following Monday, I arrived at the office before sunrise. Not because I needed the extra hours. Because I needed somewhere my thoughts couldn't follow me. Work had always been my responsibility. Now it became my refuge. I accepted projects I had postponed for months. I mentored younger managers. I started running again before dawn, something I hadn't done since my early 30s. At first, every mile felt like punishment. Then it became freedom. Pain has a strange way of clearing the noise from your mind. The stronger my body became, the quieter my anger grew. People at work noticed the change. "You seem different lately," one of my colleagues said. "You look lighter." I almost laughed. There was nothing light about carrying the realization that your marriage had been quietly slipping away. But there was something lighter about no longer pretending everything was fine. At home, I became polite. Almost painfully polite. I answered Vanessa's questions. I washed my own dishes. I folded my own laundry. I stopped reminding her about appointments. Stopped asking what time she'd be home. Stopped wondering who she was texting. She interpreted my silence as acceptance. She couldn't see it for what it really was. Detachment. One evening, she walked into the living room wearing a new dress. "What do you think?" she asked. Months earlier, I would have stood up, smiled, told her she looked beautiful. This time I glanced up from the book in my hands. "It looks nice." That was all. For the first time, disappointment crossed her face. Not because I had criticized her, because I hadn't admired her. Validation had become so routine that its absence felt like rejection. A few days later, she suggested we have dinner together. "I feel like we haven't spent much time together." The sentence almost made me smile. For nearly a year, I had been asking for exactly that. Now that I had stopped asking, suddenly she noticed the distance. "I'm working late," I replied calmly. She frowned. "I thought you said your schedule was getting easier." "It is." "Then why can't you have dinner?" Because I finally understood that sharing a table means very little when two hearts have already chosen different directions. But I didn't say that. I already have plans. The truth was simple. My plans were with myself. For the first time in years, I had become someone worth investing in again. Weeks passed. I redecorated my home office, joined a Saturday cycling group, started reconnecting with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Life slowly expanded beyond the walls of my marriage. Meanwhile, Vanessa became increasingly curious. She began asking where I was going, who I was meeting, why I smiled more often. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had spent months guarding every detail of her own life suddenly wanted complete access to mine. One Friday evening, I returned home carrying a new set of golf clubs. She looked surprised. "Since when do you play golf?" "I've always wanted to." "You never told me." I looked at her quietly. "There are a lot of things we stopped telling each other." She lowered her eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It was unfamiliar. She was beginning to realize something she had never considered possible. I no longer organized my life around her. The shift was subtle, but impossible to ignore. She started texting me during the day, sending funny videos, asking whether I'd eaten lunch. Small gestures that would have meant everything 6 months earlier. Now they felt like someone trying to water a tree after cutting its roots. One night, as I prepared for bed, she stood in the doorway watching me. "You've changed, Marcus." I buttoned my shirt for the next morning and nodded. "I know. I miss the way things used to be." I paused for a second before answering. "So do I." She looked relieved, as if we'd finally found common ground. What she didn't understand was that I wasn't talking about the recent past. I was mourning the marriage we had before secrets became easier than honesty. Before another man knew her heart better than I did. Before I learned that love alone cannot keep two people together if only one of them keeps choosing it. That night, lying awake beside her, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't waiting for her to become the woman I married again. I was waiting to become the man who could finally walk away without looking back. Regret doesn't arrive the moment you make a mistake. It arrives the moment you realize the person you took for granted has finally learned how to live without you. I didn't notice the change in Vanessa overnight. At first, it appeared in the smallest moments. She started coming home earlier. The late-night client dinners became less frequent. Her phone no longer buzzed as often at the dinner table. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice. But after 12 years of marriage, I recognized every shift in her rhythm. One Saturday morning, I was making coffee when she walked into the kitchen wearing one of my old college sweatshirts. She hadn't worn it in years. "You still make it the same way?" she said, watching me pour the coffee. "I never changed." She lowered her eyes. "No, I guess you didn't." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard in months. I handed her a mug before sitting at the opposite end of the island. There was no anger between us, only distance. She kept looking at me as though she wanted to ask something, but couldn't find the courage. Finally, she spoke. Have you been happier lately? I took a sip before answering. I've been sleeping better. She nodded slowly. I've noticed. That afternoon, I left to meet two old friends for a golf tournament. Years ago, Vanessa would have teased me about my terrible swing and insisted on taking pictures anyway. This time, she simply watched me pick up my clubs. You've been going out a lot. I have. You never tell me where. I smiled politely. You never asked before. The words weren't meant to hurt her. The truth usually hurts on its own. As I walked toward the front door, she quietly asked, Will you be home for dinner? I paused for a second. I'm not sure. The same answer she'd given me dozens of times. Only now she was hearing it from the other side. When I returned that evening, the dining table had been set. For two. Candles. My favorite steak. A bottle of wine we'd been saving for our anniversary. She looked nervous. I thought maybe we could eat together. Months ago, I would have canceled any plan to sit across from her. Now I looked at the untouched plates with unexpected calm. I already ate. Her smile faded. Oh. Silence settled between us. She blew out the candles one by one without saying another word. For the first time, I saw disappointment replacing certainty. She was beginning to understand what absence feels like. The following week, something else changed. She started texting me during the day. Hope your meeting goes well. Drive safely. Don't skip lunch. Simple messages. Kind messages. Messages I had longed to receive when my heart was still waiting for them. Now they arrived too late. One evening, I overheard her speaking on the phone in the backyard. Her voice sounded frustrated. I don't think this is working anymore. A long pause followed. No, this isn't what I thought it would be. She wasn't crying. She sounded exhausted. When she came back inside, her eyes met mine for only a second before looking away. Neither of us mentioned the conversation. Neither of us needed to. People imagine that forbidden relationships end with dramatic fights. Sometimes they end with disappointment. Reality rarely lives up to fantasy. The excitement fades. The secrecy becomes exhausting. And eventually, the person who once seemed so exciting becomes just another flawed human being. A few days later, I found Vanessa sitting alone on the back porch after sunset. She wasn't scrolling through her phone. She wasn't working. She was simply staring into the darkness. I didn't hear you come out, she said softly. I wasn't trying to. She hesitated before asking. Do you ever think about how we used to be? I remember. Do you miss it? I looked toward the backyard we'd spent years landscaping together. I miss who we were. A tear rolled down her cheek. So do I. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Not because she'd been caught. Because she was finally facing something no one warns you about. You can't return to the version of yourself that existed before you broke someone's trust. Some bridges don't burn all at once. They collapse silently beneath the weight of choices repeated over time. As I stood to go back inside, she reached for my hand. Her fingers barely touched mine. Months earlier, that simple gesture would have stopped my entire world. Now it only reminded me how different everything had become. I gently pulled my hand away. Not out of cruelty. Out of honesty. The hardest part of letting go isn't walking away from someone you love. It's accepting that they waited until your heart had finally healed before deciding they wanted it back. And as I closed the sliding door behind me, I realized something neither of us was ready to say aloud. She wasn't chasing the man she had ignored. She was chasing the man she could no longer control. The moment someone realizes they've lost you is almost never the moment they decide to change. It's the moment they realize you no longer need them. A week passed without a single argument. No accusations. No slammed doors. No dramatic confrontations. The silence between Vanessa and me had evolved into something else. Acceptance. At least on my side. One Friday afternoon, I received a call from my attorney. The paperwork was ready. He spoke calmly, reviewing timelines, financial disclosures, and the next legal steps. When the call ended, I sat in my office for several minutes, staring out at the Atlanta skyline. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. Mostly, I felt tired. There is a unique kind of exhaustion that comes from mourning someone who is still alive. Someone you see every day but can no longer reach. That evening, I placed the sealed envelope inside my briefcase before driving home. I wasn't planning to give it to Vanessa. Not yet. But carrying it felt strangely symbolic. For the first time in months, my future wasn't waiting for her decision. It was waiting for mine. When I opened the front door, the smell of homemade lasagna filled the house. Vanessa appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron I hadn't seen in years. I thought we could have dinner together. I smiled politely. It smells good. I made your favorite. I know. She waited for something more. A compliment. Gratitude. Recognition. Instead, I walked upstairs to change. When I returned, the table looked almost identical to the dinners we used to share years ago. Candles. Soft music. Fresh flowers. It would have been perfect if it had happened before my heart learned how to stop waiting. During dinner, she kept searching my face. You've been different for a while. I have. Is there someone else? The question caught me by surprise. I looked at her for several seconds before answering. No. You don't expect me to believe that. I don't need you to. She lowered her fork. Then why are you smiling again? Because peace and love aren't always the same thing. Because healing sometimes looks like happiness to the person who caused the wound. Because I had finally stopped measuring my worth by whether she chose me. But I simply said, I'm learning to enjoy my life again. She looked away. That answer hurt her more than any accusation could have. Over the next few days, her efforts became impossible to ignore. She canceled weekend plans, started leaving her phone on the kitchen counter again, asked about my meetings, remembered my schedule. She even suggested taking a vacation together. A fresh start, she called it. The words echoed painfully. Fresh starts only work when both people are honest about how the old story ended. One Sunday afternoon, she found an old photo album while cleaning the hallway closet. She carried it into the living room and sat beside me. Do you remember this trip? I glanced at the picture. We were standing on a beach in South Carolina. Young, sunburned, laughing so hard the camera had captured us slightly out of focus. I remember. We were so happy. We were. She turned another page. Wedding photos. Our first apartment. Christmas mornings. Birthdays. Years compressed into glossy pieces of paper. A tear slid down her cheek. I don't know when we lost this. I closed the album gently. I do. She looked at me with hopeful eyes, as though this conversation might still save us. You stopped bringing your heart home, I said quietly. What does that mean? It means I wasn't the first person you wanted to talk to anymore. Her lips parted, but no words came. You celebrated with someone else. You complained to someone else. You laughed with someone else. You trusted someone else. I never mentioned Adrian's name. I didn't have to. She knew exactly who I meant. I made mistakes, she whispered. Yes. I can fix them. I shook my head slowly. Some things can be repaired. And us. I looked at the woman I had loved for more than a decade. The woman I once imagined growing old beside. I think you've confused forgiveness with restoration. She frowned. I don't understand. I've already forgiven you. Her eyes widened. You have. Forgiveness helped me sleep again. She reached across the coffee table, desperately taking my hand. Then we still have a chance. I gently withdrew my hand. No. The single word shattered the hope on her face. Why? I met her eyes with a calm I never thought I'd possess. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean the relationship survives. The room became impossibly quiet. For months, Vanessa had been trying to recover the marriage she believed was slipping away. Only now was she beginning to understand the truth. She wasn't fighting to save our future anymore. She was standing in the ruins of a past that could never be rebuilt exactly as it had been. And for the first time since this journey began, she finally understood why my smile no longer belonged to her. People think the hardest part of ending a marriage is signing the papers. They're wrong. The hardest part is realizing the papers only confirm what your heart accepted long ago. I carried the envelope in my briefcase for another 3 days. Not because I was uncertain, because I wanted my final decision to come from peace instead of pain. By Wednesday evening, I knew I was ready. Vanessa was in the kitchen when I came home. She smiled the moment she saw me. I made dinner. I can smell it. And I canceled my business trip next week. I nodded. Okay. Her smile faded slightly. I thought you'd be happy. I hope it was the right decision for you. For you, not for us. She heard the difference immediately. After dinner, I asked if we could sit in the living room. The request alone made her nervous. She folded her hands together while I placed my briefcase on the coffee table. I've been doing a lot of thinking, I began. So have I. I know. I've ended things with Adrian. Her words hung in the air. For months, I had imagined hearing that confession. I thought it would make me furious. Instead, I felt almost nothing. She searched my face for a reaction. Aren't you going to say anything? I believe you. That's it. What else is there to say? Tears immediately filled her eyes. I chose you. I looked at her quietly. No. She blinked. You chose me after discovering what life looked like without me. She opened her mouth to argue before stopping herself. Because she knew I was right. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I know. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I slowly opened my briefcase. Her breathing became uneven as she watched me remove the envelope. The color drained from her face before I even slid it across the table. No. She whispered the word as though saying it softly might make it disappear. Marcus, I've already signed. She didn't touch the envelope. She stared at it, as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. You can't do this. I can. We haven't even tried counseling. I tried for months. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. A tear rolled down her cheek. I was selfish. Yes. I was blind. Yes. I wasn't thinking. I gently shook my head. That's the problem. She buried her face in her hands. For several minutes, the only sound in the room was her crying. Years ago, hearing those tears would have shattered me. Now they simply reminded me that consequences always arrive later than choices. Finally, she looked up. Do you still love me? The question deserved an honest answer. I'll probably always love the woman you used to be. And me? I took a slow breath. I don't know how to love someone I no longer trust. She reached for the envelope but couldn't bring herself to open it. I don't want a divorce. I know. I'll do anything. There it was. The sentence people often save until every other option has disappeared. Anything. But love doesn't. Survive on promises made after the damage is complete. It survives on choices made before trust is broken. I wish you'd said that when I was begging for your attention. She closed her eyes. I know. I wish you'd fought for us before another man became your safest place. I know. I wish you'd protected our marriage with the same determination you're showing now. Her shoulders collapsed. I know. For the first time since this began, there were no excuses. No blame. No attempt to rewrite history. Only truth. She finally picked up the envelope with trembling hands. I never wanted to lose you. You didn't think you could. She looked at me, completely broken. That was the tragedy. She hadn't believed I would ever stop loving her. She had mistaken my loyalty for permanence. She thought I would always be waiting, always forgiving, always hoping. But love without respect slowly becomes grief. And grief eventually learns how to let go. As I stood to leave the room, she called my name one last time. Was there ever a moment, after everything, when we still could have been saved? I stopped walking. Without turning around, I answered with complete honesty. Yes. She held her breath. The day you first realized I was disappearing. Silence. If you had reached for me then, instead of someone else, we'd probably still be sitting on the same side of this couch. When I walked upstairs, I heard the envelope finally open behind me. Not with anger, not with outrage, but with the quiet sound of a future collapsing under the weight of choices that could never be undone. And for the first time since Vanessa had asked why I didn't want her anymore, she finally understood the answer wasn't born in a single betrayal. It had been written one neglected moment at a time. The last time Vanessa asked me why I didn't want her anymore, I smiled. Not because I enjoyed watching her suffer, but because, after everything we'd been through, I finally understood something that had taken me years to learn. Love can survive disappointment. It can survive hardship. It can even survive mistakes. But it cannot survive being replaced. 3 months later, the divorce was final. There was no courtroom drama, no shouting, no one storming out in anger. Just 2 signatures, 2 quiet nods, and the end of a life we had once promised would last forever. When we stepped outside the courthouse, the autumn air felt cooler than I remembered. Vanessa stood beside her car, holding the small box of personal belongings she had taken from the house. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, emotionally, as if the certainty she once carried had finally disappeared. I never thought this would really happen, she said. I know. She looked down at her wedding ring. She had kept wearing it until that morning. Slowly, she slipped it off and held it in the palm of her hand. I thought you'd fight harder. I smiled sadly. I did. Her eyes filled with tears. You stopped. No. I shook my head gently. I finished. There is a difference. Fighting means believing something can still be saved. Finishing means accepting that you've already done everything you could. She wiped her eyes. I still wish I could change everything. I believe you. I think about us every day. I know. I think about the first apartment, our road trips, The lemon pound cake. I couldn't help smiling. So do I. For a brief moment, we weren't two divorced people standing in a parking lot. We were simply two strangers remembering the same beautiful life. Then reality returned. I hope someone loves you the way you deserve to be loved, she whispered. I looked at her for a long moment. I hope one day you forgive yourself. She looked surprised. You already have? I forgave you before I filed. Then why does this still hurt so much? Because forgiveness removes the poison. I paused. It doesn't erase the scar. She nodded slowly. For the first time in a long time, neither of us was trying to convince the other of anything. Truth no longer needed defending. As I turned toward my car, she called my name one final time. Marcus. I looked back. Did you ever stop loving me? The question deserved the same honesty I had given every other answer. I stopped expecting the woman I loved to come back. A single tear slipped down her face. I miss him. Who? The man who used to wait for me. I smiled softly. He waited longer than he should have. Then I got into my car and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Not because I hated her. Because my future wasn't behind me anymore. A year passed. Life became quieter. Healthier. I traveled more. Spent weekends with old friends. Visited my parents more often than I had in years. I laughed without forcing it. I slept through the night. The house no longer echoed with questions that had no answers. One afternoon, while walking through a neighborhood bookstore, I noticed a familiar laugh. I turned instinctively. For a split second, I thought it was Vanessa. It wasn't. Just someone whose voice reminded me that memories never completely disappear. They simply lose the power to control you. As I walked back outside, my phone buzzed. A message. Not from Vanessa. From my sister. It contained only one sentence. Proud of the man you've become. I stared at those words for a long time. Years earlier, I would have measured my worth by whether my wife still wanted me. Now, I measured it by whether I could still respect the man staring back at me in the mirror. That evening, I drove home as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. The same kind of sunset that had once witnessed the slow collapse of my marriage. Only now it looked different. Not because the sky had changed. Because I had. People often ask what my wife said after everything was over. They expect some dramatic confession. Some unforgettable speech. But the sentence I remember most wasn't spoken at the end. It happened months before, standing in our quiet kitchen. Why don't you want me anymore? Back then, I answered with the only truth I had left. Because you gave away what was mine. Today, if someone asked me what she actually took from me, my answer would be different. She didn't take my future. She didn't take my ability to love. She didn't take the man I was meant to become. She only took the version of me who believed that loving someone meant accepting less than I deserved. And losing that man turned out to be the greatest gift I ever received.